Divided House. Act 1. The Campaign Season 2015 to 2016. Chapter 1. The Unraveling Begins. The first crack appeared during what should have been an ordinary Tuesday dinner in October 2015. Sarah Martinez had always prided herself on making family dinners a sacred time, phones in the basket by the door, news turned off, just the three of them around the mahogany table her mother had given them as a wedding gift 22 years ago. "So Trump's leading in the polls," David said, cutting into his pot roast with more force than necessary. Finally, someone who isn't afraid to tell it like it is. Sarah's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Tell what like it is? You mean his racist comments about immigrants? The man's a reality TV star, David." Their son Marcus looked up from his plate, recognizing the tone. At 20, he'd become an expert at reading the temperature in the room. This wasn't their usual playful political sparring. There was something sharper here, something that made his stomach tighten. "He's a businessman," David continued, his voice gaining that edge it got when he felt defensive. "This country needs someone who understands how to make deals, not another career politician." "You mean like Hillary, who spent decades in public service?" Sarah's voice had that controlled quality that Marcus knew meant she was working hard not to raise it. "Someone who actually understands foreign policy and government? Hillary Clinton?" David laughed, but it wasn't his usual warm chuckle. "The woman who can't even handle her emails properly? Who stood by while Americans died in Benghazi?" Marcus cleared his throat. "Maybe we could talk about something else? How was your day, Mom?" But his parents were locked in now, their gazes fixed on each other across the table like gunfighters at high noon. "Those are Republican talking points, David. Fox News conspiracy theories. And everything you just said came straight from MSNBC. The silence that followed was different from their usual comfortable quiet. Marcus could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway, the hum of the refrigerator, his own heartbeat. His parents had always been on different sides, politically. His father, a lifelong Republican, who believed in small government and personal responsibility. His mother, a Democrat, who championed social programs and equality. But it had never felt like this before. Never felt like they were on different teams in a war. Chapter 2. Choosing Sides. By Christmas, the house felt like Switzerland during wartime officially neutral territory that everyone knew was anything but. Marcus came home from his junior year at State University to find his parents consuming entirely different versions of reality. His father had Fox News playing constantly in his home office, while his mother had taken to watching Rachel Maddow religiously, often with her laptop open to fact-check claims in real time. "Your mother thinks I'm some kind of fascist," David told Marcus one evening as they worked on changing the oil in Marcus's car, a tradition they'd maintained since Marcus was 12. "She doesn't think you're a fascist, Dad. She said I was supporting a demagogue." Marcus wiped his hands on an old rag, choosing his words carefully. "I think she's scared. Some of the things Trump says about women, about minorities, it worries her." David's jaw tightened. "He's not perfect, but at least he's not corrupt. At least he hasn't been getting rich off government contracts for 30 years. Is that really what you think Hillary's been doing?" "Marcus, the Clinton Foundation alone." "Okay, but what if there are legitimate explanations for some of that stuff? What if it's more complicated than either side is making it out to be?" David looked at his son for a long moment. "When did you become so diplomatic?" "When my parents started acting like strangers." The honesty of it hung between them. David's expression softened, and for a moment Marcus thought they might actually talk about what was happening to their family. Instead, his father just nodded toward the car. "Hand me that wrench." Meanwhile, Sarah was having her own conversations with Marcus, usually in the kitchen while they cooked together, another tradition that felt increasingly precious. "I don't understand how he can support someone who brags about assaulting women," she said one afternoon as they prepped vegetables for soup. "Your father raised you better than that. He taught you to respect women." "He does respect women, Mom. He respects you." Does he? Because supporting Trump feels like he's saying my concerns don't matter, that women's rights don't matter. Marcus paused in his chopping. Have you asked him about that? Like, really asked him, not during an argument? Sarah's knife stilled against the cutting board. We don't really talk anymore. Not about anything real. It's like he's become someone I don't recognize. Maybe he feels the same way about you. The words came out harsher than Marcus intended, and he immediately regretted them when he saw his mother's face crumple slightly. I'm sorry, Mom, I didn't mean... No, you're probably right. She resumed chopping, but her movements were mechanical now. I look at him and I think, how can the man who taught you to stand up for people who can't defend themselves now support someone who mocks disabled reporters? How can the man who used to cry at movies about injustice now dismiss concerns about police brutality? Marcus reached over and stilled her hands. Maybe ask him that. Not as an accusation, but as a real question. Sarah looked at her son. Really looked at him. And Marcus saw something he'd never seen before in her eyes. Fear. What if I don't like his answer? Chapter 3. The Primary Wars. Spring brought the primaries, and with them, a new level of tension that seemed to seep into every corner of the house. Marcus dreaded coming home for Easter break. The morning he arrived, he found his parents in the kitchen, pointedly not speaking to each other. His mother was reading something on her tablet while drinking coffee. His father was scrambling eggs while listening to talk radio through earbuds. Good morning, Marcus said to the room in general. Morning, sweetheart, Sarah said, immediately brightening. How was the drive? Fine. Traffic wasn't too bad. He looked between his parents. So, how's everyone doing? David pulled out his earbuds. Your mother's candidate just got demolished in Wisconsin. Bernie won Wisconsin, not Hillary, Sarah said without looking up from her tablet. And your candidate just said he wants to punch protesters in the face. He was obviously joking. Were the protesters laughing? Marcus poured himself coffee and sat down heavily. Guys, seriously? Both parents looked at him, and he saw something that made his chest ache. They looked tired, not just physically tired, but soul-deep exhausted in a way he'd never seen before. We're sorry, honey, his mother said. It's been a stressful week. Every week's been stressful since this whole thing started. David turned off the burner and faced his son. Marcus, you're old enough to understand that sometimes adults disagree about important things. I'm also old enough to understand that you two are letting politicians you've never met destroy your marriage. The words hung in the air like smoke. No one moved. The radio in David's earbuds continued its tinny chatter, the only sound in the sudden silence. We're not, Sarah started. When's the last time you guys went out together? When's the last time I saw you in the same room when you weren't fighting? When's the last time either of you asked the other how their day was? His parents exchanged a glance, the first direct eye contact Marcus had seen between them since he'd arrived. It's complicated, son, David said quietly. No, it's not. You're choosing to let this be more important than us, than our family. Marcus stood up, his coffee untouched. I'm going for a walk. When I get back, maybe we can try having a conversation that doesn't involve Trump or Hillary or any of this political bullshit that's apparently more important than the fact that I'm home for 4 days and already planning to cut it short. He left through the back door, not trusting himself to look back. Behind him, he heard the soft sound of his mother crying and his father's chair scraping against the floor. Chapter 4. The Revelation. That evening, Marcus found himself in his childhood bedroom, staring at campaign posters on his laptop screen. Trump's red hat and aggressive slogans. Hillary's blue H and calls for togetherness. Bernie's grassroots energy. The Republican field that had dwindled to also-rans. None of it felt right. He'd grown up believing in American democracy, in the idea that good people could disagree about solutions while sharing fundamental values. But watching his parents, two of the best people he knew, tear each other apart over these candidates made him question everything. Trump scared him. The casual cruelty, the way he seemed to enjoy humiliating people, the dog whistles to racist groups that weren't really whistles anymore. But he also understood his father's frustration with a system that seemed rigged for insiders, his belief that someone from outside politics might actually shake things up. Hillary frustrated him. The sense that she felt entitled to the presidency, the cozy relationships with Wall Street, the way she seemed to shift positions based on political convenience. But he also understood his mother's pride in seeing a qualified woman finally have a real shot at breaking the ultimate glass ceiling. The problem was, he could see what his parents couldn't or wouldn't. Each of them had legitimate concerns that the other was dismissing. Each of them was so focused on their candidate's virtues and the opponent's flaws that they'd stopped seeing the complexity of the choice. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Marcus?" His mother's voice, tentative. "Come in?" Sarah peered around the door, looking younger somehow in her pajamas and without makeup. "Can we talk?" Marcus closed the laptop and patted the bed beside him. She sat down, and for a moment they just existed in the comfortable quiet of his childhood room. "Your father and I used to talk about everything," she said finally. "When we were dating, when you were little, we'd stay up for hours discussing books, movies, ideas. We didn't always agree, but we always listened. What changed?" Sarah was quiet for so long Marcus thought she might not answer. When she spoke, her voice was small. "I think we both got scared. Your dad sees the country changing in ways that worry him: demographic shifts, economic uncertainty, cultural changes he doesn't understand. And I see the country potentially moving backward on things I thought we'd settled: women's rights, civil rights, basic human decency. So you're both fighting for what you think America should be, I suppose? But somewhere along the way, we stopped fighting for what our family should be." Marcus reached over and took his mother's hand. "Mom, can I ask you something? And will you really think about it before you answer?" She nodded. "Is there anything at all about Hillary that concerns you? Not what Dad or Fox News says, but what you actually think." Sarah's face cycled through several expressions: surprise, defensiveness, and finally, reluctant consideration. "The Wall Street speeches," she said finally. "I wish I knew what she said to those bankers, and I wish she'd been more forthcoming about the email server from the beginning instead of letting it become such a distraction." Marcus squeezed her hand. "See? You can think critically about your own candidate. That doesn't make you a bad Democrat. It makes you honest." But Marcus, even with those concerns, she's still so much better than— "I'm not asking you to change your vote. I'm just asking you to remember that Dad might have legitimate concerns too, even if you disagree with his conclusion." Sarah studied her son's face. "When did you get so wise?" "When my parents stopped talking to each other and started talking at each other." That night, Marcus lay awake listening to the sounds of his house. Usually, he'd hear his parents' low conversation from their bedroom, the comfortable murmur of two people sharing their days. Instead, he heard his father's snoring from the guest room and his mother's restless turning from the master bedroom. The house felt broken, and Marcus was beginning to suspect that no election outcome would fix it. Chapter 5. The fracture deepens. By summer, Marcus had taken a job at a local campaign office, not for any presidential candidate, but for a congressional race where the candidates seemed more focused on actual policy than on destroying each other. His parents viewed this as either a betrayal or a cop-out, depending on their mood. "You're wasting your civic engagement on a nobody race," his father said one evening as Marcus prepared to leave for a voter registration drive. "At least he's engaging," his mother shot back from the kitchen. "Unlike some people who just complain about the system while supporting the most destructive candidate in modern history." "Here we go again," David muttered. Marcus stood in the doorway between the kitchen and living room, literally caught between his parents. I'm engaging with democracy at a level where I think I can actually make a difference, where the candidates talk about issues instead of just attacking each other. That's naive, son. National politics matter more than some state house race. Do they? Because it seems like national politics are destroying our family, while local politics are actually helping our community. The statement hung there, challenging both parents. Sarah came to the doorway, dish towel in her hands, and for a moment, all three of them stood in the strange geometric formation they'd unconsciously created. Marcus in the middle, his parents on opposite sides. Maybe, Sarah said carefully, we could talk about Marcus's race instead of the presidential campaign tonight. David looked surprised, then cautiously hopeful. Yeah, okay. Tell us about this candidate you're supporting. For the next hour, Marcus found himself moderating a conversation between his parents about local infrastructure, education funding, and tax policy. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, but it was the first time in months he'd seen them actually listen to each other. As the evening wound down, Marcus felt a flicker of hope. Maybe they could find their way back to each other. Maybe the presidential race was just too charged, too personal, too wrapped up in their identities and fears. Maybe they could build bridges through smaller conversations about shared concerns. That hope lasted exactly 3 days. Did you see what Trump said about the Gold Star family? Sarah's voice carried from the kitchen where she was making breakfast, her tone sharp with outrage. Marcus, still in his pajamas and barely awake, heard his father's newspaper rattle in the living room. The media's blowing that out of proportion, David called back. They twist everything he says. David, he attacked parents whose son died serving our country. There's no context that makes that okay. Marcus closed his eyes, still lying in bed, and listened to his family fracture a little more. He was defending himself against a political attack. Their son is dead, David. Dead fighting for this country. And Trump questioned why the mother didn't speak, implying it was because she's Muslim. How is that defensible? The silence stretched long enough that Marcus hoped maybe his father was actually considering the question. Instead, he heard the sharp snap of newspaper pages. I'm not going to discuss this with someone who thinks Hillary Clinton's lies about Benghazi are excusable. Oh, for God's sake. Marcus got up and closed his bedroom door, but he could still hear their voices rising, still hear the sound of his childhood home becoming a battlefield. When he came downstairs an hour later, his father was gone off to work early, and his mother was sitting at the kitchen table with her head in her hands. Mom? She looked up, and Marcus saw that she'd been crying. I don't know how to do this anymore, honey. I don't know how to live with someone who can excuse that kind of cruelty. Marcus sat down across from her. Dad's not cruel. You know that. Then how can he support someone who is? It was the question at the heart of everything, Marcus realized. His mother couldn't separate his father from his political choice, and his father couldn't separate his political choice from his identity as a good man. Maybe, Marcus said carefully, people can make political choices for complicated reasons that don't define their character. Sarah looked at her son with something like desperation. But Marcus, at some point, don't your choices reveal who you are? Doesn't supporting cruelty make you complicit in it? Marcus felt the weight of being asked to judge his father, to choose sides in a war he didn't want to fight. I think people can be wrong about big things while still being good people. I think good people can make choices based on fear or anger or hope for change, even when those choices have consequences they didn't intend. And what about consequences they should have seen coming? There it was. The question that would haunt their family through the election and beyond. The question of whether ignorance was an excuse, whether good intentions mattered more than harmful outcomes, whether love could survive fundamental disagreement about what it meant to be decent. Marcus didn't have an answer. He was beginning to suspect that nobody did. Chapter 6. The Point of No Return. August brought the conventions, and with them, the final dissolution of any pretense that this was just another election cycle in the Martinez household. Marcus watched his father during Trump's acceptance speech, saw the way David's face lit up during promises to bring back jobs, to renegotiate trade deals, to drain the swamp of Washington corruption. He also saw his father's slight wince during the darker moments, the appeals to fear and division that seemed to make David uncomfortable even as he nodded along. A week later, he watched his mother during Hillary's speech, saw her tears during the historic moment of a woman accepting a major party's nomination. He also saw her defensive posture during mentions of emails and trustworthiness, the way she seemed to be willing Hillary to be better than her flaws. Both of his parents were choosing to see what they needed to see, to minimize what they couldn't defend, to hope that their candidate would rise to the office rather than be diminished by it. Marcus found himself researching third-party candidates with increasing intensity. Gary Johnson, Jill Stein, even write-in possibilities. He wasn't trying to make a protest vote. He was trying to find someone, anyone, who felt like a choice he could live with. "You're going to waste your vote on someone who can't win," his father said when he found Marcus looking at the Libertarian Party platform. "You're going to throw away your vote when the fate of the Supreme Court is at stake," his mother said when she saw him reading about the Green Party. Marcus looked up from his laptop. "Maybe the problem is that we're all so focused on winning and losing that we've forgotten about voting for someone we actually believe in." Both parents started to respond, then stopped. For a moment, Marcus thought he'd broken through. Then his father shook his head. "That's a luxury we can't afford this year, son. The stakes are too high." "The stakes are always too high," Marcus replied. "That's what they tell us every 4 years, that this is the most important election of our lifetime, that we have to hold our noses and vote for the lesser evil. What if I'm tired of choosing between evils?" His mother sat down beside him. "Honey, I understand the sentiment, but sometimes adult choices mean picking the best available option, not the perfect one. And sometimes adult choices mean refusing to participate in a system that only offers you options you can't morally accept." The conversation ended there, but Marcus could feel both parents watching him more carefully after that, as if he'd revealed something about himself that worried them, as if his political independence was somehow a rejection of everything they'd tried to teach him. Maybe it was. As Labor Day approached and the general election campaign began in earnest, Marcus realized that he wasn't just choosing a candidate anymore. He was choosing what kind of person he wanted to be, what kind of democracy he wanted to live in, what kind of family he wanted to preserve or let go. The weight of those choices felt heavier than any 18-year-old should have to carry. But looking at his parents, still living in the same house but increasingly like strangers, still sharing meals but no longer sharing dreams, Marcus understood that some weights couldn't be set down. Some choices, when once made, changed everything that came after. The campaign season was ending, but Marcus suspected that for his family, the real battle was just beginning. Act 2, The Breaking Point, Election Year 2016. Chapter 7. September Fractures. Marcus returned to campus in late August with a sense of relief that surprised him with its intensity. The dorm room he shared with his roommate Jake felt like a sanctuary compared to the minefield his childhood home had become. "Dude, you look like you've been through a war," Jake observed as Marcus unpacked with mechanical precision. "Something like that." Marcus held up his phone, showing 17 missed calls from his parents, 9 from his mother, 8 from his father. "They're not even calling to talk to me anymore. They're calling to complain about each other." Jake, a political science major from California, shook his head. "My parents are both Democrats, but even they're getting weird about this election. My mom keeps sending me articles about how Hillary's the most qualified candidate ever, and my dad keeps forwarding me stuff about how the Democratic establishment screwed over Bernie. At least they're fighting about the same party." That evening, Marcus finally returned his parents' calls. First, his mother. "Marcus, thank God. I was starting to worry something had happened to you." "I'm fine, Mom. Just busy with orientation stuff. What's going on?" A pause. "Your father. He's gotten worse. He started watching these YouTube videos, these conspiracy theory channels. Last night he tried to tell me that Hillary has Parkinson's disease and the media is covering it up." Marcus rubbed his temples. "What did you say?" I told him he was being ridiculous and showed him a fact-check article. He said fact-checkers are biased liberal media. "Marcus, I don't know who this man is anymore." "Mom, he's still Dad. He's just scared and angry and getting his information from bad sources." "But how do I live with someone who thinks I'm either stupid or evil for supporting a qualified woman over a—" She struggled for words. "Over whatever Trump is?" Marcus heard something in his mother's voice he'd never heard before, a kind of exhausted desperation that made his chest ache. Maybe take a break from political conversations for a while? Focus on other stuff? Sarah's laugh was bitter. "What other stuff, Marcus? The election is 8 weeks away. It's all over the news, all over social media, all anyone talks about at work. Your father has turned our bedroom into a Fox News viewing room. How do I take a break?" An hour later, Marcus called his father. "Son, good to hear from you. How's school?" "It's good, Dad. Mom said you two are having some disagreements." David's tone immediately hardened. "Is that what she called them?" "Marcus, your mother has become completely unhinged. She won't even consider that Hillary might be hiding a serious health condition. She just dismisses everything as conspiracy theories. Maybe because some of it actually is conspiracy theories? Or maybe because she can't handle the idea that her feminist hero is a corrupt, sick old woman who's being propped up by the media." The venom in his father's voice stopped Marcus cold. He'd never heard David talk about anyone that way, let alone about his wife's political views. "Dad, that's pretty harsh." "The truth is harsh sometimes. Your mother has chosen to live in a fantasy world where Hillary Clinton is some kind of saint instead of a career politician who's been enriching herself at taxpayers' expense for decades. And you've chosen to live in a world where Trump is going to magically fix everything despite having no government experience and a history of treating people terribly." Silence. "Son, I thought you were smarter than that." "Smarter than what? Smarter than seeing that both candidates have serious flaws? That maybe neither one deserves blind loyalty? This isn't about blind loyalty. This is about saving the country from 4 more years of failed liberal policies. And Mom thinks it's about saving the country from 4 years of authoritarian chaos. You're both so convinced the other side will destroy America that you're destroying your marriage instead." Marcus heard his father's sharp intake of breath. "Your mother and I will work things out after the election." "Will you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've both decided that being right is more important than being together." The call ended shortly after, with both Marcus and his father too angry to continue. Marcus stared at his phone, feeling the weight of watching his family disintegrate from 300 miles away. Chapter 8. October Surprises. The Access Hollywood tape dropped on a Friday afternoon in early October. Marcus was in the library when his phone started buzzing with texts from his mother. "Are you seeing this? Please tell me your father will finally see who Trump really is." This is who he's been defending, bragging about sexual assault. 20 minutes later, his father called. "Marcus, I need you to know that I don't condone what Trump said on that tape. It was disgusting and wrong." Marcus felt a flicker of hope. "So you're reconsidering your support?" A long pause. "What? I'm not." The hope died. "Dad, he bragged about sexually assaulting women. How is that not disqualifying?" "Because Hillary Clinton enabled and covered up her husband's actual assaults for decades. At least Trump was just talking like an idiot in a locker room." Marcus felt something snap inside him. "Just talking? Dad, he described committing sexual assault, and you're going to vote for him anyway because you think Hillary's worse? I think Hillary represents everything that's wrong with Washington. corruption, lies, pay-to-play politics. Yes, Trump's crude and says stupid things, but at least he's not a career criminal. He's not a career criminal because he's never been in government. That doesn't make him better. It makes him completely unqualified. Marcus, you're young. You don't understand how broken the system is. I understand that you're about to vote for someone you just admitted is disgusting and wrong because you hate his opponent more than you love your principles. The words came out harder than Marcus intended, but he didn't take them back. The silence stretched between them until his father spoke again, his voice quiet and hurt. I raised you better than to talk to me that way. You raised me to stand up for what's right. That's what I'm doing. That night, Marcus called home hoping to talk to his mother, but his father answered. She's not here, David said curtly. She's at her sister's. Said she needed space to think. Marcus felt his stomach drop. How long is she staying there? I don't know. Maybe until after the election. Maybe longer. Dad, Marcus, your mother looked at me tonight like I was a stranger. Like 30 years of marriage meant nothing because of how I'm voting. Is that the kind of person you want me to be? Someone who changes his convictions because his wife threatens to leave? I want you to be someone who doesn't vote for a person who brags about sexual assault. And I want a son who doesn't lecture his father about moral choices while planning to throw away his vote on someone who can't win. They were both quiet for a moment, the distance between them feeling much greater than the physical miles. Dad, do you think Mom's a bad person for supporting Hillary? No, I think she's wrong, but not bad. And do you think she thinks you're a bad person for supporting Trump? Another pause, longer this time. Yes, I think that's exactly what she thinks. Marcus closed his eyes. Maybe that's the real problem. Not the candidates, but that you both think political choices define moral character. Don't they? David asked quietly. If someone supports policies that hurt people, doesn't that say something about who they are? It was the question Marcus had been avoiding, the one that kept him awake at night researching third-party candidates and trying to find a choice he could live with. I don't know, Dad. I honestly don't know. Chapter 9. The Email Letter. Marcus came home for Halloween weekend to find his house transformed into a museum of political warfare. His father had claimed the living room, with Fox News playing constantly and Trump campaign materials spread across the coffee table. His mother had established a command center in the kitchen, her laptop always open to liberal news sites and fact-checking websites. They moved around each other like hostile ghosts, occupying the same space but living in completely different realities. How long has it been like this? Marcus asked his mother as she made coffee Sunday morning. Since I came back from your aunt's. We've established territories. Mom, this is insane. You're living like roommates who hate each other. Sarah's laugh was hollow. Roommates would be an improvement. At least roommates don't have to watch someone they love turn into someone they don't recognize. That afternoon, FBI Director Comey's letter about Hillary's emails hit the news. Marcus watched his parents' reactions from the kitchen doorway, seeing the story play out in real time on their separate screens. His father actually pumped his fist in the air. Finally! Maybe now people will see what she really is. His mother stared at her laptop screen in apparent shock, then slowly closed it and put her head in her hands. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. This wasn't just about politics anymore. This was about his parents taking joy in each other's pain. Dad, you're happy that Mom's candidate is in trouble? David turned and for a moment seemed to really see his son. I'm happy that the truth is coming out. The truth? We don't even know what's in these emails yet. But you're celebrating because you think it hurts Mom's choice. Marcus, this proves that Hillary Clinton— I don't care what it proves about Hillary Clinton. Marcus's voice rose higher than he'd intended. I care that you just celebrated something that you knew would devastate Mom. When did hurting her become more important than loving her? David's face went white. That's not— I wasn't— But Marcus was already walking away, toward the kitchen where his mother was still sitting with her head in her hands. "Mom?" She looked up, and Marcus saw that she'd been crying. 28 years, she said quietly. 28 years of marriage, and he just cheered because something bad happened to someone I support. Not because it was good for the country, but because it was bad for me. Marcus sat down beside her. Maybe he was just caught up in the political moment. "No, Marcus." I saw his face. For just a second he forgot I was there, and I saw who he's become. Someone who sees me as the enemy. That evening, Marcus found his father in the garage, working on a car that didn't need fixing. "She thinks I hate her," David said without looking up. "Do you?" The wrench in David's hand stilled. "No, but I hate what she's become. I hate that she thinks I'm evil for wanting to change a system that's left people like me behind. I hate that she dismisses every concern I have as racism or stupidity. And she hates that you dismiss every concern she has as hysteria or corruption." David finally looked at his son. "When did it get so complicated? We used to be able to disagree about things. When you stopped disagreeing about policies and started disagreeing about each other's character. But Marcus, at some point, don't your political choices reflect your character?" It was the same question his mother had asked, and Marcus still didn't have an answer. But he was beginning to understand that maybe the question itself was the problem. "What if they reflect your fears instead?" Marcus asked. "What if you're both so scared of what the other person's candidate might do that you can't see what your own candidate actually is?" David set down his wrench and really looked at his son. "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe Mom's so scared of Trump's cruelty that she can't admit Hillary's flaws. And maybe you're so scared of Hillary's corruption that you can't admit Trump's unfitness. Maybe you're both making fear-based choices and then defending them like they're moral crusades." His father was quiet for a long time. "And what about you? What choice are you making?" Marcus had been dreading this question, but now that it was here, he felt oddly calm. "I'm choosing not to vote for either of them. I'm voting for someone I actually believe in, even if they can't win. That's a luxury your mother and I don't have." "No, Dad. That's a choice you and Mom won't make. There's a difference." Chapter 10. Election Night. Marcus drove home for election night with a sense of dread that had been building for weeks. He'd voted that morning for a third-party candidate whose name he planned to keep to himself, and felt both proud of his choice and terrified of his parents' reactions. He arrived to find his parents in their separate territories, both glued to their screens as returns started coming in. The atmosphere was toxic with tension and barely suppressed hope on both sides. "How'd you vote, son?" his father asked as Marcus set down his bag. "I voted." "That's not what I asked." Marcus looked between his parents, both of whom had turned to face him with expressions of desperate anticipation. They wanted him to choose sides, to validate one of their choices, to make this about more than just their marriage falling apart. "I voted for someone I believed in." "Marcus," his mother said carefully, "please tell me you didn't throw away your vote on a third party when democracy itself is at stake. And please tell me," his father added, "that you didn't vote for the most corrupt politician in American history." Marcus felt the familiar weight of being pulled in two directions. But this time, instead of trying to find middle ground, he made a different choice. "I voted for the Libertarian candidate." The silence that followed was deafening. Both parents stared at him as if he'd announced he was dropping out of school to join a cult. "Marcus," his mother said slowly, "you essentially voted for Trump. Third-party votes in swing states elect Republicans." "No," his father said, "he essentially voted for Hillary. Taking votes away from Trump is the same as supporting her." Marcus looked at his parents, both of whom he loved, both of whom had taught him to think for himself, both of whom were now angry at him for doing exactly that. "I voted for the candidate whose policies I most agreed with and whose character I could respect. I voted for someone I could look at in the mirror and feel good about supporting. Maybe that's throwing my vote away, but at least I'm not voting for someone I have to make excuses for." His mother's face crumpled. Honey, this isn't about feeling good. This is about stopping someone dangerous from becoming president. And this isn't about ideological purity, his father added. This is about breaking up the Washington establishment that's been screwing over working people for decades. Marcus stood up. And this is exactly why I voted the way I did. You're both so focused on stopping the other guy that you've forgotten to ask whether your guy is actually worth supporting. He walked toward the stairs, then turned back. I'm going to be in my room. Let me know when you want to have a conversation that's not about how disappointed you are in me for making my own choice. As he climbed the stairs, Marcus heard his parents' voices rising again. Not at each other this time, but about him. About how his generation didn't understand pragmatism. About how idealism was a luxury they couldn't afford. About how he'd been naive to think he could stay above the fray. Maybe they were right. Maybe his vote was meaningless. A gesture that accomplished nothing except making him feel morally superior. But as he lay in bed, listening to his parents argue downstairs while election returns flickered on screens throughout the house, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in months. Peace with his own choices. Even if his family was falling apart. Even if his vote didn't matter. Even if the country was about to elect someone he couldn't support. At least he knew he'd acted according to his own convictions rather than someone else's fears. It wasn't much, but on a night when everything felt broken, it was something. Chapter 11, The Morning After. Marcus woke to silence. Not the comfortable quiet of a sleeping house, but the heavy, ominous silence of a family that had run out of words. He checked his phone. 6:47 a.m. November 9th, 2016. Donald Trump was President-elect of the United States. He found his parents in the kitchen, sitting at opposite ends of the table with their coffee and their phones, the space between them feeling like a chasm. His mother's eyes were red and swollen. His father looked like he hadn't slept. "Morning," Marcus said quietly. His mother looked up, and Marcus saw something in her expression that made his chest tighten. She looked at him like he was a stranger, like his vote for a libertarian candidate had somehow made him complicit in what she clearly saw as a catastrophe. "I hope you're happy," she said, her voice flat and emotionless. "Mom?" "No, Marcus. You wanted to make a point about both sides being equally bad. Well, now we get to see what happens when good people decide they're too pure to make hard choices." His father cleared his throat. "Sarah, don't blame Marcus for—" "Don't!" His mother's voice was sharp. "Just don't. You got what you wanted. Congratulations." David's face darkened. "What I wanted was change. What I wanted was someone who would shake up a system that's been failing people like us for decades." "People like us?" Sarah's laugh was bitter. "David, we're upper-middle-class white suburbanites. We're not the forgotten Americans that Trump was supposedly fighting for. I grew up in a factory town that doesn't have factories anymore. My friends from high school are working 2 jobs and still can't afford their kids' college. Maybe you've forgotten what it's like to worry about money, but I haven't. And you think a billionaire who inherited his wealth and has never worked a real job in his life is going to help them?" Marcus watched his parents face off across the kitchen table, their voices rising with a fury that seemed to contain months of suppressed anger and disappointment. "I think someone from outside the system might actually change it instead of just managing it, by appointing his family to government positions, by threatening to jail his political opponents, by cozying up to dictators. This is your idea of change? Better than 4 more years of the Clinton machine." "The Clinton machine?" Sarah stood up so quickly, her chair scraped against the floor. "You mean experienced public servants who understand how government works? You chose chaos over competence because you were angry about factories closing? I chose change over corruption. You chose a con man over a qualified woman because you couldn't stand the idea of Hillary Clinton being president." David stood up too, his face flushed with anger. "And you chose the most ethically compromised candidate in modern history because you couldn't stand the idea of a woman losing." Marcus watched his parents stare at each other across the table, their faces twisted with an anger that seemed to contain years of resentment and disappointment that had nothing to do with politics. "Stop," he said quietly. Neither parent seemed to hear him. "You know what, David? You're right. I couldn't stand the idea of watching a qualified woman lose to a man who brags about sexual assault. I couldn't stand the idea of my son growing up in a country that thinks that's acceptable. And I couldn't stand the idea of my son growing up in a country where being connected is more important than being honest." "Stop!" Marcus's shout echoed through the kitchen. Both parents turned to look at him, their faces shocked by the volume and intensity of his voice. "Just stop, both of you. You want to know why I voted third party? This is why. Because I refuse to choose between parents who hate each other more than they love their family." Marcus looked at his mother, then his father, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time in months. "Mom, you're not angry about the election. You're angry that Dad chose Trump over your feelings. And Dad, you're not celebrating political change. You're celebrating that you were right and Mom was wrong. You've both turned this election into a proxy war for your marriage, and you're so busy being right that you've forgotten how to be kind to each other." His parents stared at him, the anger draining from their faces, replaced by something that looked like recognition. "I'm 20 years old," Marcus continued, his voice quieter now, but still firm. "I shouldn't have to be the adult in this family. I shouldn't have to choose sides between parents who taught me to think for myself and then got angry when I did exactly that." He picked up his coffee mug and headed toward the stairs. "I'm going back to school today. When you two decide whether you want to be married to each other or to your political parties, let me know." As Marcus packed his bags, he could hear his parents' voices from the kitchen, quieter now, but still talking past each other, still defending their choices, still unable to hear what the other was actually saying. By the time he loaded his car and drove away, they were back to their separate territories, his mother crying at the kitchen table while his father watched triumphant coverage in the living room. Marcus drove back to campus with the radio off, thinking about choices and consequences, about principles and pragmatism, about the difference between being right and being wise. He'd voted his conscience, but his family was still broken. His parents had voted their fears, and the country felt broken too. Maybe that was the real lesson of 2016, that sometimes there were no good choices, only the choices you could live with. And sometimes living with your choices meant learning to live without the people who couldn't accept them. Chapter 12, Thanksgiving Cancelled. The call came on a Tuesday in mid-November. Marcus was in his dorm room, trying to focus on a paper about the Electoral College that felt surreal to write in the aftermath of the election. "Marcus?" His father's voice sounded tired and older than his 52 years. "Hey, Dad, how are you doing?" A long pause. "Your mother moved out yesterday." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd known this was coming, had seen it building for months, but hearing it said out loud made it real in a way that left him breathless. "Where did she go?" "Your Aunt Linda's. She says it's temporary, just until we can figure things out." "But Marcus," David's voice cracked slightly, "she won't talk to me. She won't even look at me." Marcus closed his laptop and gave his father his full attention. "What happened? I mean, what finally happened?" "We got into another fight about Trump's cabinet picks. She said anyone who could support his appointments had no moral center. I said anyone who couldn't see that Hillary would have been worse was living in a fantasy. And then she said—" David trailed off. "What did she say?" "She said she didn't know who I was anymore, that the man she married would never have made excuses for the things Trump says and does, that I'd become someone she couldn't respect, let alone love." Marcus felt his heart breaking for both of his parents. "And what did you say?" "I said maybe she was right. Maybe I had changed. Maybe watching factories close and friends lose their homes and politicians promise change while everything stayed the same had made me someone different. Someone who was willing to take a risk on an outsider instead of trusting the same people who'd been in charge while everything fell apart. And then she packed a bag and left. She said she needed to think about whether our marriage could survive this level of fundamental disagreement about right and wrong. Marcus stared out his dorm room window at students walking across campus, their lives seemingly uncomplicated by the kind of devastating choices his family was facing. "Dad, do you want to save your marriage?" "Of course I do. But Marcus, I can't pretend to be someone I'm not. I can't pretend I don't think this country needed the kind of change Trump represents, even if he's a flawed messenger. And Mom can't pretend she doesn't think Trump represents everything wrong with America." That's about the size of it. They were quiet for a moment, the weight of the situation settling between them. "So what does this mean for Thanksgiving?" David's sigh was audible even through the phone. "I think we're going to skip it this year. Your mother doesn't want to be in the same house as me, and I don't want to put you in the middle of this any more than we already have." Marcus felt a surge of anger, not at either parent specifically, but at the situation, at the election, at the whole political system that had somehow convinced two good people that their differences were irreconcilable. "So politics wins," Marcus said. "What do you mean?" "I mean that Trump and Hillary are more important than our family." David was quiet for a long time. "Marcus, this isn't about Trump. This is about your mother and me having fundamentally different values." "No, Dad. It's about you and Mom letting a politician you've never met become more important than the family you've built together. It's about choosing to be right instead of choosing to be kind. Sometimes being kind means enabling bad behavior, and sometimes being right means losing everything that actually matters." After Marcus hung up, he sat in his dorm room for a long time, thinking about holidays and traditions and the way families can dissolve when they forget that love is more important than politics. He called his mother that evening. "Marcus, honey, I'm so glad you called. Your father told you?" "He did. Mom, are you okay?" Sarah's laugh was shaky. "No, I'm not okay. I'm staying in my sister's guest room at 48 years old because I can't figure out how to live with a man who thinks my deepest values are wrong." "Do you still love him?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. Yes, I love who he used to be. But, Marcus, I don't know if I can love who he's become. What if he's still the same person, but he's scared and angry and making choices based on those feelings instead of his values? Then he needs to figure out how to get back to his values. And what if you're scared and angry too, and making choices based on those feelings? Silence. "Marcus, this isn't the same thing. I'm not the one supporting someone who—" "Mom, you're the one who moved out. You're the one who decided that Dad's political choices were more important than your marriage. Maybe Trump is terrible, but Dad isn't Trump. Dad is the man who taught me to ride a bike and helped with my homework and cried when I graduated high school. He's still that person, even if he made a political choice you can't understand. But Marcus, at some point, don't our choices define who we are?" It was the question that kept coming up, the one that seemed to be at the heart of everything. Marcus had been thinking about it for weeks, and he finally thought he had an answer. Maybe our choices define our judgment, but our character is defined by how we treat the people we love when they make choices we disagree with. His mother was quiet for a long time. "That's very wise for someone who's 20 years old. I learned it from watching my parents tear each other apart over an election that's already over." That night, Marcus made a decision. If his parents wouldn't have Thanksgiving together, he wouldn't have it with either of them. He called both of them and explained that he'd be spending the holiday with his roommate's family in California. "But Marcus," his mother protested, "this is our first major holiday since everything changed." "Exactly. And I'm not going to choose sides in my parents' political war. When you're ready to be a family again, I'll be here. Until then, I'm going to spend holidays with people who remember that love is more important than being right." It was the hardest thing Marcus had ever said to his parents, but as he hung up the phone, he felt something he hadn't experienced in months, a sense of peace with his own choices. His family was broken, but he didn't have to let it break him too. Act 3, The Mediator, 2017 to 2020. Chapter 13, The New Geography. Spring semester of Marcus's junior year began with a new reality. His parents lived in different places and communicated only through him. What had started as a temporary separation had calcified into something that looked increasingly permanent. His father rattled around the family house like a ghost, maintaining the yard and fixing things that didn't need fixing. His mother had moved from his aunt's house into a small apartment across town, decorating it with a determined cheerfulness that felt brittle around the edges. Marcus found himself becoming a reluctant ambassador between two hostile nations. "How's your father doing?" his mother would ask during their weekly phone calls, her voice carefully neutral. "He's okay, keeping busy. He fixed the back fence last weekend." "The fence was fine." "I know. Is he seeing anyone?" "Mom, he's still wearing his wedding ring. I don't think he's seeing anyone." A pause. "I still wear mine, too." These conversations had become ritualized, a careful dance around the topics they couldn't discuss directly. His mother never asked about his father's politics, and his father never asked about his mother's emotional state. But both used Marcus as a conduit for information they craved but couldn't request outright. "Your mother's been posting a lot on Facebook," his father mentioned during one of their calls. "Political stuff. I wouldn't know. I unfollowed both of you months ago." "Smart kid. But Marcus, some of the things she's sharing about the administration, about Trump supporters." David's voice trailed off. "What about them?" "She's sharing articles that basically say anyone who voted for Trump is either stupid or evil. Does she think that about me?" Marcus closed his eyes, recognizing the hurt in his father's voice. "Dad, she's angry and scared. She's processing the election results the same way you are, by consuming media that confirms what she already believes." "But I don't share articles calling Hillary supporters evil." "No, but you share articles about how the deep state is trying to undermine Trump's presidency. How is that different?" David was quiet for a moment. "I guess it's not." These small moments of self-reflection gave Marcus hope, but they were rare. Most of the time, his parents seemed trapped in their separate echo chambers, each becoming more convinced that the other side represented an existential threat to everything they held dear. Chapter 14, The Messenger. By his senior year, Marcus had developed a sophisticated understanding of diplomatic communication. He'd learned to translate between his parents' different languages, to validate their feelings without endorsing their conclusions, to find common ground in places where they couldn't see it themselves. "Your father called yesterday," his mother mentioned during one of his visits to her apartment. Marcus looked up from his homework. "What did he want?" "He wanted to know if I was planning to attend your graduation ceremony." "What did you tell him?" "I told him I wouldn't miss my son's graduation for anything, but I wasn't going to pretend we're still a happy family for the sake of appearances." Marcus set down his pen. "Mom, it's not about appearances. It's about the fact that you both love me and want to celebrate something important in my life." "But Marcus, how do I sit next to a man who has become someone I don't recognize? The same way he sits next to a woman he thinks has been brainwashed by liberal media. You focus on the thing you have in common, your love for me, and you ignore everything else for 2 hours." Sarah looked at her son with something like amazement. "When did you become so wise about relationships?" "When my parents forgot how to have one." The graduation ceremony became Marcus's first major diplomatic victory. He assigned his parents to separate rows, but made sure they could both see him receive his degree. He ate lunch with his mother and dinner with his father, managing to spend meaningful time with both without forcing them into the same space. "Your mom looked good," his father said as they shared pizza that evening. "She did. She's been taking yoga classes. I'm glad. I want her to be happy, even if—" David trailed off. "Even if you can't be happy together?" David nodded, looking older than his 54 years. "I never wanted it to end like this, Marcus. I couldn't pretend to be someone I'm not, and she couldn't pretend that your choices didn't hurt her. Do you think we'll ever be able to be in the same room again, without it being about you?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "I think you'll both have to decide that your relationship with each other matters more than being right about politics. And I'm not sure either of you is ready for that yet." Chapter 15. The Long Game. Marcus's first job out of college was with a nonprofit focused on civic engagement. Ironic, given his family's political dysfunction, but perhaps inevitable. He moved to a city 3 hours from both parents, close enough to visit regularly, but far enough to maintain emotional distance from their ongoing Cold War. The 2018 midterm elections brought a new wave of tension. His mother was energized by Democratic victories, seeing them as validation of her opposition to Trump. His father was defensive about Republican losses, interpreting them as evidence of media bias and deep state manipulation. "Maybe this will finally wake people up to what Trump really is," his mother said during one of their dinners together. "Maybe," Marcus replied noncommittally. "You don't sound convinced." "I'm not convinced that electoral outcomes change people's fundamental beliefs. Dad didn't vote for Trump because he loved everything about him. He voted for Trump because he wanted change and didn't trust Hillary. None of that has changed. But surely seeing what Trump's presidency has actually been like—" "Mom, Dad sees the same presidency you do, but he interprets it differently. Where you see chaos and corruption, he sees someone fighting the establishment. Where you see attacks on democratic norms, he sees necessary disruption of a broken system." Sarah put down her fork. "So you think I'm wasting my time hoping he'll come to his senses?" "I think you're wasting your time hoping he'll come to your senses. If you want to understand each other again, you'll have to start by trying to understand his perspective instead of waiting for him to abandon it." "But Marcus, his perspective includes supporting someone who—" "I know. And his perspective on your perspective is that it includes supporting policies that he thinks have hurt people he cares about. You're both right about some things and wrong about others. But neither of you will admit that as long as you're focused on winning instead of understanding." These conversations with his parents had become Marcus's primary form of family relationship. He spent hours on the phone with each of them, listening to their frustrations, validating their feelings, and gently challenging their assumptions. It was exhausting work, but he'd come to see it as necessary, not just for his family, but for his own understanding of how democracy was supposed to work. Chapter 16. The Olive Branch. The breakthrough came, unexpectedly, during the 2020 primary season. Marcus was visiting his father when David mentioned that he'd been watching some of the Democratic debates. "Just to see what they're saying," he added quickly, as if consuming opposition media required justification. "What did you think?" David was quiet for a moment, seeming to wrestle with something. "Some of them made sense. I mean, I still disagree with most of their solutions, but I could see why people are concerned about health care costs and student debt." It was the first time in years that Marcus had heard his father acknowledge any validity in Democratic positions. "Have you told Mom that?" "How would I tell her that? We don't talk." "You could call her?" David looked at his son like he'd suggested jumping off a bridge. "Marcus, your mother thinks I'm basically evil. She's not going to want to hear that I agree with Elizabeth Warren about drug prices." "Maybe she would. Maybe she's tired of thinking you're evil. Maybe she'd be relieved to discover that you're still capable of seeing other perspectives. And maybe she'd see it as vindication that she was right all along." Marcus studied his father's face, recognizing the fear beneath the defensiveness. "Dad, what's the worst thing that could happen if you called her?" "She could hang up on me. She could tell me she never wants to hear from me again. She could make it official that our marriage is over." "And what's the best thing that could happen?" David was quiet for a long time. "We could remember why we fell in love 30 years ago. Which outcome seems more likely? The worst one." Marcus reached over and put his hand on his father's shoulder. "Dad, you've been living with the worst outcome for 3 years already. What do you have to lose by trying for the best one?" That evening, Marcus called his mother. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to really think about your answer." "Okay." "If Dad called you tomorrow and said he wanted to have a real conversation, not about politics, just about how you both are doing, would you take the call?" Sarah was quiet for so long that Marcus wondered if the connection had dropped. "Is he thinking about calling?" "Answer my question first." Yes, I think I would. But Marcus, I don't know what we'd say to each other. Maybe you'd start by remembering that you used to be friends." Chapter 17. The phone call. The call happened on a Tuesday evening in March 2020, just as the country was beginning to shut down for COVID-19. Marcus had arranged it carefully, speaking to both parents separately, managing expectations, and establishing ground rules. No politics, no recriminations, no attempts to relitigate the past 4 years. He wasn't on the call, but both parents described it to him afterward. "We talked for 2 hours, his mother told him the next day, her voice containing something Marcus hadn't heard in years, genuine warmth. "What did you talk about?" "Everything except the things we disagree about. Your graduation, his work, my yoga classes, the neighbors, your cousin's wedding. It was like talking to an old friend I hadn't seen in a long time." His father's description was similar but more cautious. "She sounds good. Happy, I think. Or at least not miserable. We didn't fight, which was something." "How did it feel?" Marcus asked. "Familiar. And strange. Like putting on a coat you haven't worn in years. It still fits, but it feels different." The calls became weekly, then twice weekly. His parents developed their own version of the diplomatic protocols Marcus had been using for years. Careful subjects, neutral territory, focus on shared concerns rather than differences. They talked about the pandemic, about their families, about Marcus's career, about everything except the political chasm that had driven them apart. It wasn't intimacy exactly, but it was communication. It was a start. Chapter 18. The Reckoning. The 2020 election brought a new test of his parents' fragile détente. Marcus watched nervously as the campaign intensified, waiting for the political tensions to destroy the progress they'd made. But something different happened. Instead of retreating to their separate corners, his parents began having careful conversations about their concerns. "Your father's worried about the economy," his mother mentioned during one of their calls. "He thinks the lockdowns went too far." "What do you think?" "I think public health had to come first. But I can see why small business owners would feel differently." It was a small thing, but Marcus recognized its significance. His mother acknowledging that his father's perspective had some validity, even if she didn't share it. His father showed similar growth. "Your mother's really concerned about voter suppression. She thinks Republicans are trying to make it harder for people to vote." "Do you think she's wrong?" David paused. "I think some of the restrictions are reasonable, but maybe some of them go too far. Maybe there's a middle ground between election security and voter access." When Joe Biden won the election, Marcus braced for a return to the hostility of 2016. Instead, he found his parents navigating their differences with something approaching maturity. "I'm relieved," his mother admitted during their call the day after the election was called. "But I'm trying not to gloat. I know your father is disappointed." "How do you think he's handling it?" "Better than I expected. He called me Saturday night, and we talked about what Biden's presidency might mean. We didn't agree about everything, but we weren't mean to each other. His father's perspective was similarly measured. I'm not happy about the result, but I'm not going to pretend the world is ending. Your mother was gracious about it. She didn't rub it in or anything. Do you think Trump lost fair and square? David was quiet for a moment. I think there were irregularities, like there are in every election. But do I think there was massive fraud that changed the outcome? No. Biden won. It was the first time Marcus had heard his father accept an election result that disappointed him without claiming it was illegitimate. It felt like a breakthrough. Chapter 19. The Distance Remains. By early 2021, Marcus's parents had developed what could generously be called a friendship. They talked regularly, shared news about family and work, and even occasionally offered each other emotional support during difficult times. But they remained separated. The apartment his mother had moved into as a temporary measure had become permanent. His father had converted the guest room into an office and seemed to have accepted his solitary status. Do you ever think about getting back together? Marcus asked his mother during one of his visits. Sarah looked out the window of her small living room, considering the question. I think about it sometimes. I miss the life we had together. I miss having someone to share things with every day. But I don't miss the fighting. I don't miss feeling like I was married to someone who saw me as the enemy. This distance, it's sad, but it's peaceful. His father's answer was similar. I love your mother. I probably always will. But I don't know if we can live together again without falling back into the same patterns. What patterns? Making everything political. Seeing every disagreement as a battle for the soul of our marriage. I don't want to risk what we've rebuilt by trying to go backward. Marcus understood, but it made him sad in a way he couldn't fully articulate. His parents had learned to coexist, to respect each other's perspectives, to maintain a caring relationship despite their differences. But they'd also accepted a fundamental limitation. They could be friends, but they couldn't be partners. Do you think you'll ever live together again? Marcus asked both parents at different times. Both gave variations of the same answer. Maybe someday, but not now. We're not ready. Chapter 20. The New Normal. By the time Marcus turned 25, his family had settled into a new configuration that worked, if not perfectly, then at least sustainably. His parents lived separately, but maintained regular contact. They shared information about their lives, supported each other through difficulties, and celebrated each other's successes. They'd learned to navigate political differences without turning them into personal attacks. When they disagreed, which they still did regularly, they focused on understanding rather than winning. Your mother thinks the infrastructure bill is too expensive, his father mentioned during one of their calls. And you think it's necessary investment, Marcus replied. Right, but we talked about it like adults. She explained her concerns about debt, and I explained my concerns about crumbling bridges. We still disagree, but we understand each other's reasoning. Marcus had come to see his role not as a mediator trying to reunite his parents, but as a bridge helping them maintain connection across difference. It wasn't the family structure he'd grown up with, but it was functional in its own way. Do you wish we'd stayed together? His mother asked him during one of their dinners. Marcus considered the question carefully. I wish you'd figured out how to disagree without hating each other earlier. But honestly, I think you're both happier now than you were in those last years before you separated. But we destroyed our family. No, you changed it. We're still a family. We just have a different shape now. Sarah smiled sadly. You're very diplomatic for someone whose parents' divorce taught him about compromise. Separation, Marcus corrected gently. You never actually got divorced. His mother looked surprised, as if she'd forgotten that detail. No, we didn't, did we? Maybe that means something. Maybe it means you're not done figuring this out. But even as Marcus said it, he wasn't sure he believed it. His parents had found a way to love each other at a distance, to maintain connection without conflict. It wasn't the reunion he had once hoped for, but it was something precious in its own right. Proof that even the deepest political divisions didn't have to destroy fundamental human bonds. Sometimes, Marcus thought, the best you could do was learn to disagree with grace. And maybe, in a democracy, that was enough. Act 4, Reconciliation and Acceptance, 2021, present. Chapter 21. The Birthday. Marcus's 26th birthday fell on a crisp Saturday in October 2021. He'd planned a quiet celebration dinner with friends, maybe a movie. The last thing he expected was a phone call from his mother at 8 in the morning. "Marcus, I know this is last minute, but would you like to have dinner tonight at Romano's?" Romano's had been their family restaurant for special occasions, birthdays, anniversaries, celebrations of all kinds. Marcus hadn't eaten there since before his parents' separation. "Just you and me?" A pause. "Actually, your father and I were thinking, we'd like to take you out together. If you're comfortable with that." Marcus sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. "Together? Like at the same table?" "Like a family dinner. For your birthday. We've been talking about it for weeks, and we think we're ready to try." That evening, Marcus arrived at Romano's with a mixture of excitement and dread. He found his parents already seated at their old corner booth, looking nervous but determined. His father wore the blue shirt his mother had always said brought out his eyes. His mother had chosen the dress she'd worn to Marcus's college graduation. "Happy birthday, son," his father said, standing to give him a hug. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," his mother added, her smile bright but fragile. For the first few minutes, conversation was stilted, careful. They talked about the menu, the weather, Marcus's work. But gradually, something familiar began to emerge, the easy rhythm of a family that had shared thousands of meals together. "Remember when you tried to order wine here when you were 16? His father asked, grinning. "And the waiter just looked at him like he'd lost his mind," his mother added, laughing. "I thought I was so sophisticated," Marcus said, feeling some of the tension leave his shoulders. They told stories, shared updates, asked about each other's lives with genuine interest. His mother mentioned her book club. His father talked about the woodworking class he'd started taking. They listened to each other, really listened in a way Marcus hadn't seen in years. "This is nice," his mother said quietly as they waited for dessert. "Being together like this?" "It is," his father agreed. "We should have done it sooner." Marcus looked between his parents, seeing something in their faces he'd almost forgotten. Contentment. Not happiness exactly, but a peaceful satisfaction with the moment they were sharing. "What changed?" he asked. "I mean, what made you decide to do this now?" His parents exchanged a look, not the hostile glances of their fighting years, but something softer, more knowing. "We realized," his mother said carefully, "that we'd been so focused on what we couldn't share that we'd forgotten about what we could share." "And what's that?" "You," his father said simply. "Our pride in the man you've become, our love for our son, our gratitude for the family we built together, even if it looks different now." Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. "So what happens next?" His parents looked at each other again, and his mother spoke first. "We don't know. We're taking it one dinner at a time. But we know this," his father added. "Whatever happens between your mother and me, we want to be present for the important moments in your life. Together." As they left the restaurant, Marcus hugged both of his parents goodbye. His father heading to the family house, his mother to her apartment. But for the first time in 5 years, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a beginning. Chapter 22. The Wisdom of Distance. Over the following months, Marcus's parents began celebrating other occasions together. His work promotion, his mother's birthday, Father's Day. They developed an unspoken protocol. Arrive separately, stay for exactly 2 hours, keep conversations focused on family rather than politics, leave before anyone could say something they'd regret. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, still topics they couldn't discuss, But there was also something precious in its limitations. A recognition that some relationships could only work within carefully maintained boundaries. "Do you ever regret it?" Marcus asked his mother during one of their regular dinners. "The separation, I mean." Sarah considered the question while stirring her coffee. "I regret that we couldn't find a way to stay together. But I don't regret that we found a way to stop hurting each other." "Do you think you'll ever get back together?" "Honestly, I don't think so. Too much has changed. But Marcus, what we have now, it's not what I expected, but it's something I treasure. We can enjoy each other's company again. We can celebrate our son together. We can be proud of the family we raised without having to live with the daily friction of our differences." His father expressed similar sentiments. "I miss being married to your mother, but I don't miss the fighting. I don't miss feeling like everything I said was wrong, like everything she believed was a personal attack on me." "So you're both okay with how things are?" "We're both grateful for how things are. It's not the ending we planned, but it's an ending we can live with." Marcus came to understand that his parents had achieved something many couples never manage. They'd learned to love each other enough to let each other go. Not completely, they remained connected through him, through shared history, through genuine care for each other's well-being. But they'd accepted that some differences run too deep for daily navigation. Chapter 23. The New Traditions. By 2023, the Martinez family had established new traditions that honored both their connection and their separation. Marcus's birthday dinners became annual events, carefully orchestrated celebrations that lasted exactly long enough to feel meaningful without overstaying their welcome. They added other occasions: Marcus's graduation from his master's program, his promotion at work, eventually his engagement to his college girlfriend, Sarah. The irony of his fiancée sharing his mother's name was not lost on any of them, though they all chose to see it as a sign of hope, rather than coincidence. "Your parents seem to have figured something out," his fiancée observed after meeting both of them at their engagement celebration. "They're not together, but they're not bitter either." "It took them 7 years," Marcus replied. "But yeah, they figured out how to disagree without destroying each other." "Think they'll both walk you down the aisle?" Marcus smiled. "I think they'll both be there, sitting in the same row, proud of their son. And that's enough." The wedding planning became another exercise in diplomatic coordination. His parents offered to pay for the reception together, sitting down with Marcus and his fiancée to discuss budgets and venues like the civilized adults they'd finally learned to become. "Your mother has excellent taste in flowers," his father mentioned after one planning session. "Always did," Marcus replied. "Yeah, always did." There was something wistful in his father's voice, a recognition of all the things that had been good about their marriage, alongside an acceptance that those good things hadn't been enough to overcome their fundamental differences. Chapter 24. Full Circle. Marcus's wedding day in spring 2024 became the ultimate test of his parents' new relationship. They arrived separately but sat together in the front row, his mother in a blue dress that complemented his father's tie, a coordination they claimed was coincidental, but which Marcus suspected was intentional. During the ceremony, as Marcus exchanged vows with his fiancée, he caught sight of his parents. His mother was crying happy tears, the kind she'd always shed at emotional moments. His father had his hand resting gently on her shoulder in a gesture of comfort that was purely instinctive, divorced from politics or resentment or any of the issues that had driven them apart. For just a moment, they looked like what they'd always been underneath everything else. Two people who had loved each other enough to create a family, who had raised a son together, who shared a history that no political disagreement could erase. At the reception, they danced, once, to a song that had been special to them early in their marriage. It lasted 3 minutes, and when it ended, they hugged briefly and returned to their separate tables. But everyone who witnessed it understood what they'd just seen. Not a reconciliation, but something perhaps more valuable. A recognition that love can survive the death of a marriage, that families can endure even when they're reconfigured, that some bonds transcend the differences that make living together impossible. "Thank you," Marcus told both of his parents as the evening wound down, "for being here together, for figuring out how to do this." "Thank you," his mother replied, "for never giving up on us, for showing us that we could disagree about everything and still love each other." His father nodded. "You taught us something important, son. You taught us that being right isn't worth losing your family over." As Marcus watched his parents leave the reception, his father offering his mother his arm to help her navigate the steps in her heels. A gesture of courtesy that came from decades of shared life, he felt a deep sense of peace. His family hadn't survived intact, but it had survived. They'd learned to honor their love for each other within the limitations imposed by their differences. They'd discovered that sometimes the most profound act of love is accepting that someone can't be who you need them to be, while still celebrating who they are. Epilogue. The lesson. 5 years later, as Marcus and his wife prepared for the birth of their first child, he found himself reflecting on the lessons his parents had taught him, not just through their successes, but through their failures and their recovery from those failures. "What kind of grandparents do you think they'll be?" his wife asked as they painted the nursery. "The kind who will spoil their grandchild completely and disagree about everything from education to discipline to politics," Marcus replied. "But they'll do it without destroying each other, and they'll do it with so much love that the baby will grow up knowing that families can survive anything if they remember that love is more important than being right, even if they never get back together." Marcus paused in his painting, considering the question. "I used to think the only happy ending would be them reuniting. But I've learned that sometimes the happy ending is people figuring out how to love each other within the constraints of who they actually are, rather than who they wish the other person would become." When their daughter was born, both grandparents were at the hospital, arriving separately, staying in shifts to avoid overcrowding, but both completely besotted with their first grandchild. Marcus watched his parents take turns holding his daughter, saw the way their faces softened with wonder and joy, and understood that this was what they'd been working toward all along. Not a return to what they'd been, but an evolution into what they could become. His parents would never live together again. They would probably never stop disagreeing about politics and values and the proper way to interpret current events. But they would continue to show up for the moments that mattered. Continue to choose family over ideology when it counted. Continue to prove that love carefully maintained and thoughtfully bounded could survive almost anything. In a country still learning how to disagree without destroying itself, Marcus thought, maybe that was the most important lesson of all. That democracy, like marriage, like family, isn't about finding perfect agreement. It's about finding ways to live together despite imperfect understanding, to maintain connection across difference, to choose relationship over righteousness when the stakes are highest. Some bridges once burned can't be rebuilt. But sometimes, if you're patient and careful and willing to accept something smaller than what you once had, you can build something new from the ashes. Something that honors what was while accepting what is. Something that might not be perfect, but is, in its own way, enough.